A billionaire thought he had everything until a young waitress showed him that the richest moments in life can't be bought, only shared. Ethan was the kind of man everyone in the city knew about, even if they had never met him. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who never had to ask for anything twice. People called him a billionaire, a word that sounded almost unreal, like something out of a magazine. To most, he lived a perfect life. Big houses, shiny cars, private jets, and a long list of successful companies with his name attached to them. But behind all of that, behind the carefully polished smile and expensive suits, there was a part of him that very few people ever saw. That was the part of him that was a father. His son, Lucas, was only 5 years old. Bright eyes, a laugh that could make strangers smile, and a mind always buzzing with curiosity. Ethan loved his son deeply. When he looked at Lucas, he felt something no business deal or luxury could ever give him. And yet, loving him and knowing how to be with him were two very different things. Every day, Ethan felt like he was failing. At the second part, in the world of money and power, Ethan knew every move. He could predict markets, close deals worth millions, and convince entire boards of directors to follow his lead. But at home, when Lucas refused to eat his dinner, or when he threw a tantrum because he didn't want to wear shoes, Ethan felt helpless. His instinct was to control, to order, to command. That was the only way he had ever lived. But Lucas wasn't like the people in his meetings. Lucas was a child, unpredictable, messy, and free. And Ethan, for all his intelligence, didn't know how to reach that world. Sometimes he would watch other parents, the way they laughed and played with their kids in parks, or how they could calm them with just a hug. He would see nannies or teachers crouch down to a child's level and talk softly until the storm passed. Ethan wanted to do that, but it felt unnatural to him. His own father had never been like that. His childhood had been full of rules, structure, and silence. His father provided everything: good schools, a big house, the best clothes, but love was something he had never really learned to give. Ethan had promised himself that he would do better with his own son, but most days it felt like he was failing that promise. On that particular evening, Ethan decided to take Lucas to dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants. It was a place he often used to impress business partners, where the tables were covered in white linen and the air always smelled faintly of expensive wine. For Ethan, it was normal, just another place he could walk into without a reservation. For Lucas, it was the kind of place where everything felt too quiet, too polished, too grown up. The little boy fidgeted in his seat before the menus had even arrived. Ethan had tried to prepare him. "We're going to a nice dinner tonight. Lucas, you have to sit still and behave. Can you do that for me?" he had said while helping him into a tiny blazer that matched his own. Lucas had nodded earnestly, but he was 5. A promise like that didn't last very long when surrounded by shining silverware and soft, echoing voices. Within minutes of sitting down, Lucas started swinging his legs against the chair, tapping the table with a spoon and sliding halfway under the white cloth just for fun. Ethan's jaw tightened. He glanced around the room, noticing how other diners were beginning to look over. Some smiled at the boy's energy, but others frowned, their brows raised in silent judgment. Ethan hated that. Hated the feeling of being out of control in public, being the center of whispers. "Lucas, sit up," Ethan said firmly, trying to keep his voice low. "But Daddy, I'm bored," Lucas whispered back, dragging out the word. "You can't do this here," Ethan muttered, pulling him gently back onto the chair. "This is a restaurant. You need to sit like a big boy." Lucas puffed out his cheeks and crossed his arms. For a moment he was quiet, but then he slid down again, this time crawling under the table and giggling. Ethan's heart sank. He wanted to laugh too, because Lucas's little laugh was contagious. But all he could think about was how ridiculous it must look to everyone else. He leaned down, whispering urgently, "Lucas, come back up here right now." But Lucas only laughed harder, knocking into the table legs, making the silverware rattle. Ethan rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in the room on him. This was his weakness, parenting in public. In his world, he was untouchable, powerful. But with his son acting out, he felt stripped bare, like everyone could see how unprepared he really was. It wasn't that Ethan didn't want to play or laugh with his son. He did. He loved Lucas's wild spirit. But somewhere inside him, there was always a voice that said he needed to be serious. He needed to keep control. That voice came from years of training, years of his own father's influence. He wanted Lucas to have everything he didn't have growing up, but somehow, in his effort to give him the best, he forgot that sometimes children needed something much simpler. As Ethan sat there, trying to coax Lucas out from under the table without making a bigger scene, he felt an uncomfortable twist in his chest. He realized that he didn't actually know how to fix this moment. He didn't know how to reach his own son. Not here, not now. And that realization stung more than any failed business deal ever could. When the waitress approached their table, Ethan was almost relieved. Maybe she would distract Lucas long enough for him to regain control of the situation. Straightened in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks, trying to put back on that calm, composed mask he wore so easily in every other setting. But deep inside, a small, quiet fear was growing, the fear that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the father his son needed him to be, and it was in that exact moment. With Lucas giggling on the floor and Ethan silently drowning in embarrassment, that something completely unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The waitress who came to their table that night was not what Ethan expected. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with a tired look in her eyes, but a kind smile that seemed to shine through anyway. Her name tag read Sarah. She carried herself differently than most servers in that expensive restaurant. While others moved quickly and quietly, almost stiff with formality, Sarah seemed lighter, warmer, as if she carried a small piece of sunshine. With her, when she reached the table, she noticed the little boy under the cloth before she even looked at Ethan. Most waiters in this place would have ignored the child or maybe even frowned. But Sarah crouched slightly, peeking under the tablecloth, and gave a small laugh. "Well, hello there," she said softly, as if she was talking to a secret friend. "What are you doing down here? Looking for treasure?" Lucas's giggle grew louder. He peeked out from under the table, his eyes wide with surprise that someone was actually talking to him down there instead of pulling him out. "I'm hiding," he whispered back, his voice full of mischief. "Ah, a secret mission," Sarah said, nodding seriously. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." Then she winked at him before turning to Ethan. "Can I get you started? With some drinks?" Ethan cleared his throat, trying to pull himself back into control. "This water for my son, sparkling for me, thank you." He gave a tight smile, hoping she wouldn't judge the scene she had just walked into. But Sarah wasn't looking at him with judgment. She was still crouched, smiling gently at Lucas. Instead of walking away, she suddenly got down lower, right onto the floor, tucking her knees under herself until she was eye level with the little boy. Ethan's eyes widened. In this restaurant, where everything was polished and formal, a waitress in a neat uniform was now crouching under his table like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What are you hiding from?" Sarah whispered to Lucas. Lucas leaned close, grinning. "From Daddy," he said, pointing toward Ethan with a giggle. "Oh, is that so?" Sarah laughed softly. "Well, I don't blame you. Daddies can be very serious sometimes. Should we hide together?" And before Ethan could say anything, she crawled a little closer under the tablecloth. Lucas clapped his hands and laughed so loudly that a few people at nearby tables turned to look. Ethan felt his face heat with embarrassment. This was insane. This was a 5-star restaurant. Waitresses were not supposed to crawl on the floor. Children were not supposed to play games during dinner. And yet, for some reason, Ethan could not bring himself to stop it. He watched, frozen, as Sarah and his son whispered secrets under the table, their laughter floating out like little bells. Lucas had never lit up like that with a stranger before. It was as if she had unlocked something in him that Ethan didn't know how to reach. "Lucas," Ethan said quietly, trying to sound calm. "Come back up here. You're disturbing people."
Out.
But Lucas only peeked out again, his eyes sparkling. "Daddy, we're spies. We're hiding from the bad guys." Sarah grinned. "She don't blow our cover," she said, putting her finger to her lips. Ethan wanted to sigh, but instead he leaned back in his chair, unsure what to do. Part of him was mortified. He could feel the glances from other diners, some amused, some clearly annoyed. But another part of him, small, quiet but growing, was fascinated. How did this waitress, a stranger, know exactly how to calm and distract his son? After a few minutes, Sarah crawled back out, dusting off her uniform with a playful smile. "Mission complete," she said to Lucas, who finally climbed back into his seat. Calmer now and grinning from ear to ear, Ethan looked at her, trying to keep his voice polite. "Thank you. But you didn't have to," he trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. Sarah shrugged. "Sometimes kids just need a little fun. Makes everything easier, doesn't it?" Her tone was light, but her eyes held a kindness. That made Ethan feel strangely exposed, as if she could see right through him. For the rest of the evening, every time Sarah came back to their table, she found a way to include Lucas. Instead of just asking Ethan for their order, she asked Lucas. If he wanted to help her choose a secret dish, she gave him a napkin folded into the shape of a bird. She even showed him how to balance a spoon on his nose, making him laugh so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. Ethan sat there, watching it all unfold, and something inside him twisted. He felt relief, of course relief, that Lucas was finally calm, that the stares from other diners had stopped. But there was something else too, something deeper. He was jealous, not of Sarah herself, but of the way his son responded to her. The way Lucas looked at her, laughed with her, trusted her instantly. Ethan wanted that kind of connection with his son. He wanted to be the one who could make him light up like that, but he didn't know how. As Sarah walked away after bringing their meals, Ethan leaned closer to Lucas. "You really like her, don't you?" he asked. Lucas nodded eagerly, his mouth full of food. "She's funny, she plays, she's not boring." Ethan forced a smile, but those words stung. Was that how his son saw him? Boring? Serious? Was always telling him to sit still and behave? He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. Deep down, he knew Lucas was right. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly humbled. Here he was, a billionaire who could buy anything in the world. And yet he couldn't buy the simple bond between a child and someone who understood how to play. Watching Sarah crawl on the floor with his son had shaken something inside him. He had walked into the restaurant expecting just another dinner. But now, he felt like he was watching a lesson unfold right in front of his eyes. A lesson he didn't even realize he needed. The evening went on, and Lucas remained cheerful, thanks mostly to Sarah. She treated him not as a nuisance, not as a spoiled child in a fancy restaurant, but as a little person who deserved attention and care. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. The image of her, crouched under the tablecloth with his son, replayed in his mind again and again. By the time dessert arrived, Ethan wasn't thinking about business meetings or phone calls waiting for him. He wasn't even thinking about the deals he had lined up for the week. His mind was on Lucas, on the way his son's laughter filled the room when someone bothered to meet him at his level. For the first time in a long while, Ethan wondered if maybe he had been getting it all wrong. Maybe being a good father wasn't about giving Lucas the best schools, the best clothes, the safest life. Maybe it was about something much simpler. Maybe it was about crawling on the floor when that's what your child needed. That thought scared him, but it also stirred something hopeful, something new. And as he sat there, watching his son lick chocolate from a spoon with Sarah laughing beside him, Ethan felt the beginning of a change he couldn't yet explain. Something inside him was shifting, quietly but powerfully, in ways he had never expected. Ethan sat back in his chair, his hands resting on the edge of the table, but his eyes stayed on Lucas. The boy was different tonight. There was a glow on his face, the kind of glow Ethan had rarely seen, and it had nothing to do with the fancy lights above or the expensive food in front of him. It came from laughter, from attention, from the simple joy of being seen. And the one who gave him that joy was not his father. It was a waitress, a stranger. For most of the evening, Sarah kept finding small ways to bring Lucas into the moment. She didn't treat him as a child who should stay quiet while adults talked. She treated him like someone who belonged there. Every time she came to check on the table, she asked him something: what his favorite color was, what superhero he liked best, or what he thought the chef should make for dessert. She crouched down when she spoke to him so their eyes were level. She didn't tower over him like most grown-ups did. Ethan noticed every little detail. The way Sarah lowered her voice when Lucas whispered to her, as if she was part of a secret world only they shared. The way she laughed freely at his silly jokes, not in a fake way, but with real joy. Even the way she nodded seriously when he told her something as simple as, "I can run faster than my dog." Lucas loved it. His eyes shone, his cheeks stayed red from smiling too much, and he sat still longer than Ethan thought possible. It's just because Sarah made him feel like the star of the night. Ethan felt relief at first, grateful that someone had calmed his son down. But the longer it went on, the heavier his chest felt. He couldn't stop thinking about one question. Why couldn't he do that? He thought back to the past few years of being a father. Most of his memories with Lucas were full of rules. Sit properly. Don't spill your juice. Stop running. Be quiet. He had always thought those rules were what made him a good father, that structure and discipline would prepare his son for life. But what had it really done? It had made Lucas restless, always pushing against those rules, always searching for a way to escape. And now, here was Sarah, someone who had probably never read a book on parenting, someone who didn't live in mansions, or send her kids to private schools. Yet she knew exactly how to reach Lucas in ways Ethan never had. Ethan sipped his sparkling water, but it tasted flat in his mouth. He felt uncomfortable, not with Sarah, but with himself. For the first time in years, he felt small. He had built his life around controlling business, controlling people, controlling outcomes. But in this little corner of the restaurant, he realized there was one thing he could not control: the bond between his son and someone else. Lucas turned to him suddenly, holding up the spoon Sarah had balanced on her nose earlier. "Daddy? Look," he said, sticking the spoon onto his own nose and crossing his eyes to keep it there. Ethan managed a smile, but it was stiff. "Very clever," he said softly. "Try it, Daddy." "Daddy," Lucas shouted, his voice carrying across the restaurant. A few diners looked over again. Ethan shook his head quickly. No, not now, please," Lucas begged. "It's fun," Ethan hesitated. Something inside him wanted to say yes, just to see his son laugh again. But another voice in his head, the louder one, said no. He couldn't do that here. Not in a place where he was known, not in front of strangers. He was a man of reputation, a billionaire, someone people looked up to. Could he really sit here and balance a spoon on his nose like a child? "No, Lucas," he said firmly. "Eat your food." Lucas's smile faded. He dropped the spoon onto the plate with a small clatter and looked down, pushing his food around with his fork. Ethan's chest tightened. He had just watched the light dim in his son's face. And all because he had said no to something so simple, so harmless. A few minutes later, Sarah came back, and immediately Lucas lit up again. "Look, Sarah," he said, picking up the spoon. "Watch me." He stuck it on his nose again, laughing loudly. Sarah clapped her hands softly and grinned. "That's amazing. You're a natural," she said, as if he had just performed a magic trick. Ethan's throat went dry. That was it. That was the connection he wanted but didn't know how to give. It wasn't about rules or discipline or perfection. It was about seeing the world through Lucas's eyes, even if it meant crawling under a table or putting a spoon on your nose. He leaned back, staring at the boy who was now happily chattering with the waitress again. He thought about his own father, a man who never once played a game with him, never once crawled on the floor, never once laughed at a silly joke. His father had taught him how to win, how to earn, how to control, but he had never taught him how to love freely. And now, Ethan realized, he was in danger of passing that same coldness down to his own son. The thought struck him hard. He could give Lucas every toy, every vacation, every luxury money could buy. But what good was it if he couldn't give him the one thing he needed most? Presence, joy, connection. As the dinner went on, Ethan barely tasted his food. It was too deep in thought, his mind replaying every laugh, every sparkle in Lucas's eyes, every small act Sarah had done that brought his son to life. He didn't know this woman beyond her name tag and her uniform. Yet tonight, she was teaching him more about fatherhood than he had learned in 5 years. At one point, Sarah leaned toward Lucas and whispered something that made him burst out. Laughing again, Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he could see the bond. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It was natural, easy, simple, and it left him with a strange ache in his heart. He realized then that he was jealous, not of Sarah herself, but of what she represented. She showed him a mirror, and in that mirror he saw the truth. He had been missing the point all along. Lucas didn't care about expensive clothes, or restaurants, or the perfect life Ethan tried to build. Lucas just wanted someone to join him in his world, to laugh with him, to crawl on the floor if that's where the fun was. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt humbled. He wasn't the hero of his son's story, not tonight. Tonight that role belonged to a waitress in a black uniform with tired eyes and a warm heart. But maybe, he thought, maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could learn. When the evening slowed down and the last plates were cleared, Ethan found himself watching Sarah again. The restaurant was buzzing with soft conversations and the clinking of glasses, but at his table, things felt strangely calm. Lucas was happily coloring on the back of a children's menu Sarah had given him, his little tongue sticking out in concentration. For the first time that night, Ethan wasn't panicking about his son making noise or causing trouble. The chaos had passed. But instead of relief, Ethan felt a new kind of heaviness, one that pressed at his chest. He wanted to say thank you to Sarah, but the words felt too small. She hadn't just served them food. She had given him something he couldn't buy. She had given his son joy, and she had shown Ethan a truth he wasn't ready for. Still, he couldn't let the night end without speaking to her. When she came back to check on them, Ethan finally asked, "Do you have a minute?" Sarah looked surprised, glancing at the other tables she was serving, then nodded. "Sure," she said. She leaned on the edge of the table, her eyes shifting between Ethan and Lucas. "I just wanted to thank you," Ethan said, his voice low but steady, for helping tonight. Lucas really enjoyed himself. Sarah smiled, her eyes soft. "He's a great kid. Just needed someone to play along." Ethan hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in his mind all night. "How did you know what to do? I mean, how did you know to get down on the floor with him? Do you meet him like that?" Sarah shrugged lightly, but her answer was thoughtful. "Kids don't live in our world. They live in theirs. If you want to connect with them, you have to go there. Sometimes that means sitting on the floor. Sometimes it means making silly faces or pretending to be a spy. It's not complicated. It's just about paying attention." Ethan leaned back, her words echoing in his head. It sounded so simple when she said it. But for him it felt like learning a foreign language. "Do you have kids?" he asked carefully. "Yes," Sarah said, nodding. "A little boy. He's 7, full of energy, always asking questions. I work a lot, but I make sure he knows I'm there for him. It's the most important thing." Something shifted in Ethan then. A waitress in an expensive restaurant, working late hours just to provide for her child, yet still finding ways to laugh, to play, to give him the attention he needed. She didn't have his wealth, his houses, his private schools. But in that moment, Ethan realized she was giving her child something far more valuable than he was giving Lucas. "What do you mean by being there for him?" Ethan asked. Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "Kids don't care if you buy them big things. They care if you notice the small things. It's like when they build something out of blocks, or when they tell a silly joke, or when they want you to watch them run. They don't need you to be perfect.
Right.
They just need you to show up, to be present, even if it's messy.
Right.
My son doesn't need a perfect mom. He just needs me to be his mom." Her words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He thought about all the times he had told Lucas he was too busy, all the times he had left him with nannies so he could attend meetings, all the times he had dismissed his little games because he thought they weren't important. "Presence," Ethan repeated quietly. The word felt heavy in his mouth. Sarah nodded. "That's it." Presence. Be there, even if it's not pretty. Even if it means crawling on the floor in a restaurant. She smiled softly, glancing at Lucas, who was still lost in his coloring. Ethan followed her gaze, and for the first time that night, he saw his son differently. He didn't see a problem to manage or a task to control. He saw a little boy who just wanted his father to join his world. A world that was colorful, loud, playful, and sometimes messy. You make it sound so easy, Ethan said with a faint laugh, though there was no humor in his voice. It is easy, Sarah said simply. But it's also hard because adults forget what it's like to be children. We think being serious is the right way. But kids don't want serious. They want someone who will laugh with them, even if just for 5 minutes. Ethan felt something stirred deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It was a mix of regret and hope. Regret for the moments he had already lost, but hope that maybe he still had time to change. The rest of the dinner passed quietly. Ethan found himself watching Lucas more than eating. Every little thing the boy did suddenly felt important. The way he hummed while coloring, the way he kicked his feet gently under the chair, the way he looked up every few seconds just to see if anyone was watching him. Ethan realized that his son had been reaching out for attention all along, and he, blinded by his own seriousness, had been too busy to notice. When the check came, Ethan signed it without a second thought. Money had never been an issue. But tonight, money felt meaningless. He looked at Sarah as she tucked the receipt into her apron, wanted to say more, to tell her how much her words had affected him. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you." Not just for the service, for everything. Sarah gave a small smile, almost as if she understood more than he had said. "Take care of your boy," she replied gently. Then she walked away to tend to another table. Ethan sat there in silence. For a moment, his mind replaying every word she had spoken. Presence, attention, simplicity. They were such small things. And yet they were the very things he had been missing. On the ride home, Lucas leaned sleepily against him in the car. "Daddy," the boy mumbled. "Yes, son. Can we go there again? That place was fun." Ethan's throat tightened. Of course, he whispered, "We'll go again." But inside, he knew it wasn't about the restaurant. It wasn't about Sarah either. It was about the lesson she had given him, a lesson worth more than any dinner he had ever paid for. When he carried Lucas to bed that night and tucked him in, Ethan lingered by his side longer than usual. He watched his son's peaceful face, the soft rise and fall of his chest, and he felt something inside him shift. For the first time, he didn't see fatherhood as a duty or a test to pass. He saw it as an invitation to step down from his world of power and control, and to enter the small magical world of his child. And in that quiet bedroom, while his son drifted off to sleep, Ethan made himself a promise. He would learn to crawl on the floor. He would learn to laugh more, to listen more, to be present. He would learn to give his son what money could never buy. The promise wasn't easy. It scared him. But it also filled him with hope, because maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the father Lucas truly needed. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the night before. The words Sarah had spoken kept replaying in his mind. Presence, attention, simplicity. He had always thought being a good father meant giving Lucas everything money could buy. The best toys, the best school, the biggest house. But he realized now that all of that meant nothing if he didn't give his son himself. Real time, real attention, real love. He got out of bed quietly so as not to wake Lucas and went to the kitchen. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. He made coffee and leaned against the counter, thinking this was going to be harder than he thought. Changing habits, especially ones formed over decades, was not easy. He had always been in control, always organized, always serious. But being present for a child wasn't about control. It was about flexibility, playfulness, and patience. That was new territory for him. When Lucas finally woke up, rubbing his eyes and yawning, Ethan crouched down to greet him. "Good morning, buddy," he said, smiling. Lucas blinked at him sleepily and smiled back. Ethan realized that simple, morning greetings, moments he had rushed through before, were a chance to connect. "Daddy, can we play?" Lucas asked, sitting up on the bed. Ethan hesitated. Normally, he would have said he had work to do, or that they didn't have time. Today was different. Today he remembered Sarah's words, nodded. "Of course," he said, crouching to Lucas's level. For the first time in a long time, Ethan got down on the floor with his son. He built towers with blocks, rolled toy cars back and forth, and even made up silly stories about dragons and spaceships. Lucas laughed constantly, a sound that filled the apartment with warmth. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that, not just a polite chuckle, but a full, joyful laugh with his son. It wasn't perfect. Ethan fumbled with the blocks, spilled a cup of juice, and even knocked over one of Lucas's creations by accident. But he didn't care. In fact, he realized that making mistakes, being imperfect, was part of the experience. Lucas didn't mind at all, hugged his father tightly and said, "You're the best, Daddy." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Those simple words were worth more than any business success, any contract he had ever signed. The day went on, and Ethan made small choices that reflected his new mindset. He canceled an early morning meeting so he could take Lucas to the park. They ran together, Lucas leading the way, while Ethan tried to keep up, laughing when he tripped over a tree root. They played on the swings, Ethan pushing Lucas as high as he could, both of them laughing until their faces were red. Ethan noticed how other parents smiled when they saw him joining in. He didn't care about appearances anymore. What mattered was Lucas's joy. Even at lunch, Ethan stayed fully present. They made sandwiches together, Lucas insisting on pudding. Too much peanut butter and jelly on the bread, and Ethan went along with it instead of scolding him. The kitchen became messy, but that didn't matter. Every spilled drop, every laughter-filled mess, was a memory he would treasure. By evening, Ethan felt a change in himself. It was subtle, but unmistakable. He felt lighter, happier, more connected. For so long, he had thought wealth and control were the most important things. Now he realized that love, presence, and attention were the richest gifts he could give. Money could buy comfort, but it could never buy connection, and he wanted that connection more than anything. Later that night, after Lucas was asleep, Ethan sat quietly in the living room. He thought about Sarah. He wanted to thank her properly, to tell her how much her simple acts had changed his life. But he realized that the lesson was already making its way into his daily life. He had seen the effect of attention, patience, and play firsthand. He understood that being a father wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up. Even in the small moments, the next few days followed the same pattern. Ethan made time for Lucas every morning and evening, playing with him, listening to him, laughing with him. He even started sharing little parts of his own childhood, telling Lucas about his own mistakes, funny memories, and moments when he had been scared or unsure. Lucas loved hearing these stories. Ethan felt closer to him with every word. Work still demanded attention, of course, but Ethan learned to balance it. Stopped using his wealth as a shield to avoid small, messy moments. He realized that. Boardrooms could wait, meetings could wait, but childhood was fleeting. The little boy who once crawled under a table and laughed with a stranger would not remain 5 forever. Ethan didn't want to miss a single moment. Weeks later, they went back to the restaurant. Ethan watched Lucas scan the dining room, looking for familiar faces. He smiled when Lucas spotted Sarah. She greeted them warmly, crouching down just like before. But this time, Ethan didn't feel small or jealous. Instead, he felt grateful. He had learned the lesson. Joined Lucas on the floor for a small game, balancing spoons and making silly faces. Lucas giggled and hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're the best, Daddy." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. He had learned something important. It was never too late to change, to become the parent his son needed. Presence, attention, laughter, love, these were not things that could be bought or scheduled. They were gifts he could give freely every single day. By the time they left the restaurant, Ethan noticed the way Lucas held his hand, the way he leaned on him without hesitation. trusting him completely. That trust was priceless. That bond, nurtured through play and patience, was worth more than all of Ethan's wealth combined. As they walked back to their car, Ethan silently promised himself something new. He would never forget the lessons of that night. He would continue to show up, not just in body, but in heart and mind. He would laugh, play, listen, and crawl on the floor if that's what it took to meet Lucas at his level, because that was the way to truly connect. From that day forward, life changed in subtle but powerful ways. Ethan became a father who didn't just provide, but who participated. Lucas became more confident, happier, and more adventurous, knowing his father was fully present. Ethan realized that real wealth wasn't in his bank account or his properties, it was in the moments he shared with his son, in the laughter they created together, and in the love that flowed freely between them. And every time he thought about that night in the restaurant, watching a stranger crawl on the floor with his son, Ethan smiled. That simple act had sparked a transformation that money could never buy, one that would shape the rest of their lives. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be a father, and he embraced it completely, with all the joy, patience, and love he could give.